Hey folks, thanks for watching. I started the video yesterday. I said I thought it was going to be a busy week weather-wise, and I was not planning for a significant earthquake and tsunami threat to develop, just later that afternoon. So we saw that unfold yesterday. That was a magnitude 8.8. That's a very strong earthquake that occurred in the Northwest Pacific off the coast of the far east of Russia. So I've highlighted that quake here. Again, 8.8. It was revised, I think, up from 8.6 or 8.7 initially, all the way up to 8.8. And for some perspective, since they've kept the record of these magnitudes, maybe since the late 1800s, early 1900s, this would be like a top 5 or top 6 quake, the whole Earth. It's been the strongest earthquake since the 2011 Japan one, which occurred along with the catastrophic tsunami there. This area historically with earthquakes has been known because of the megathrust fault here to cause large Pacific tsunamis. So that concern immediately rose after that occurred. We saw tsunami watches issued for virtually the entire western U.S. coastline. That watch was upgraded in Hawaii to a warning, and this came with an EAS alert. So that meant, folks' phones went off, and the sirens started sounding every hour until the waves arrived. I mean, this was significant. I was making calls to colleagues and friends there to avoid the coastline. We saw traffic jams as people tried to flee. Fortunately, these waves moved very quickly, but just given the distance, they did have hours to get out of the way, which it seems most people did, which is good news, obviously. Now, it seems like there was a downgrade overnight of that warning to an advisory, at least for some parts of the island. And the waves, again, the report's a little bit conflicting now. This occurred yesterday evening. It's obviously nighttime there now. It's only about 6 a.m. here, Central Time in the U.S., and we're not getting the full extent of the flooding. There has been some coastal flooding reported, maybe some minor damage, but it's clear that the kind of significant catastrophic tsunami is not what occurred, at least in the islands of Hawaii right now. But nonetheless, a scary situation, not always waking up thinking about tsunami and tsunami warnings. Hawaii has had I'll call it a busy July in terms of weather. So south of the islands, fortunately well south in terms of impacts. We saw major Hurricane Iona. I think we talked about this yesterday. That has weakened since then. It was a Category 3 storm. It's weakened. Now you can see it losing a lot of the characteristics you'd expect of a hurricane. But just behind it, it's had this twin. I believe that's Tropical Storm Kelly spinning just to its east that's been following it across the Central Pacific. So Hawaii nearly, or maybe I should say narrowly, avoiding those tropical storms there. And then just 2-3 weeks ago, Kilauea on the islands of Hawaii here was spewing, this is from the USGS, 1,200 feet lava fountains. So that's the John Hancock building in Chicago. That's the size of a significant skyscraper. So Hawaii has seen the gamut of weather risks, avoiding some of them, and now a tsunami. So an impressive July out in the islands there. It was kind of concerning to see these water levels spike as the tsunami crossed from west to east across the Pacific. These are the water levels at Midway Island over the last roughly 18 to 24 hours, or I should say maybe 24 to 48 hours here. So you can see the kind of predictable rising and falling of the tides here on Midway. And you can see how smooth those water levels change. And then clearly something yesterday evening has come in that's very different. That is that tsunami. You can see these water levels change a few feet. It doesn't take much, in terms of these large tsunami waves, given how much water they contain, to cause some damage here. So that gave us kind of the first clue that this was maybe a more significant event when we saw these water levels changing so rapidly on Midway. And then what's kind of neat, I'm going to flip through it and go from west to east on these stations. So that was Midway. I've shifted to Hawaii here. And so the times are matched up. So you can see further to the east, a few hours later, this arrived in Hawaii. And again, this went 1 to 2 feet of change here, maybe even 4 feet on that one there. And that's impressive, water level changes here. So enough to cause some, coastal flooding and damage here. Again, the full extent of it isn't quite clear yet, but it appears that the more significant damage has been avoided up to this point. But nonetheless, scary situation. Then you can see these oscillating waves on the back side of it. I won't pretend to be an expert on what's all happening here. I'm getting a little bit outside of the meteorological forte at this point, but flooding impacts, to property, it's still something of a concern. Jumped over and look at Hilo. This was kind of pointed north on the Big Island here, so it was a bit of an area of concern, and we saw some videos of flooding from that that have come out here this morning. You can see a few feet of change there, and then finally, a few hours later, all the way over toward Monterey, California. Now you can obviously see the water level changes here not as drastic, which is good news, but those advisories and the warnings at times extended all the way up to Northern California. especially in some of the inlets, which can funnel and raise the heights of those waves even more. Now, speaking of tsunamis, yesterday afternoon, we were kind of waiting. I think I started yesterday with the discussion that we were kind of watching Nebraska and South Dakota for additional severe thunderstorm development. We were worried this corridor and here, might see some additional severe weather threat, maybe some flooding that had the derecho-like event on Monday night. And we did see some of that yesterday, fortunately not to the same magnitude, but I'll go ahead and play this. Saw storms develop south central South Dakota. Those pushed east, saw that little bow echo there. Was kind of congealed into storms near Nebraska, and this formed a decent MCS, a mesoscale convective system that pushed through Iowa, brought quite a bit of rainfall to this area here, and is still pushing. This is going to stop here soon toward the Mississippi River there, and still possessing a number of thunderstorms along it. So they've dropped some of the warnings associated with this. We still have a severe thunderstorm watch for a few of these counties in Iowa, and then a wide area of flood watches across eastern Iowa and northern Illinois. We'll look at those in a second. But this was, again, not as strong as what we saw on Monday night, but a decent and widespread system. We can see that just in the SPC reports. A lot of wind reports through southeast South Dakota near Sioux Falls and south. Sioux City, remember they recorded that 99-mile-an-hour gust near there on Monday night. We did see some significant wind reports. Those are in black, but fortunately we don't see a widespread swath of them here. And probably a few more reports to fill in here as daylight reveals maybe the extent of branches down and perhaps some outbuildings with some issues, but not as widespread of event again. And then this pushing east and weakening overnight, fortunately, before kind of at least right here as of the recording right here, and this is likely to weaken further before pushing into Illinois here this morning. If we look at the last 48 hours of precipitation, I did this just to include, this is valid July 30th. I'm going to refresh it just one more time just in case. I did it to include the rain that we saw come through on Monday night as well. And so just more of the same really for this July with Iowa, eastern Nebraska, eastern South Dakota, southern Minnesota, getting out on those significant measurable rains. This area, the NDVI values are quite literally off the chart. At this point might be pushing into too much rain territory for some of these counties here, especially some that are still trying to clean up after some of the damage from Monday night and some of those scattering wind reports from last night as well. Still hoping to get some rain in here. We're going to talk about this in just a second. This kind of corridor, southwest Michigan, northwest Indiana, and northeast Illinois. I think the news is looking a little bit better for rainfall here over the next kind of 24 to 48 hours. Underneath what I'll call this, MCS event and the rainfall here, and this has been our heat dome across the south and the southeast. We've seen significant high temperatures down here. We talked about kind of Tampa, Central Florida breaking some temperature records, swelling up into the triple digits. Yesterday evening, I was kind of looking at temperature observations in the lower Mississippi River Valley and saw some just like absolutely disgusting ones. There's a few in eastern Arkansas where the temperature reading was 100 degrees Fahrenheit and the dew point was over 80. You do not see that very often, and that's just about the worst kind of weather I can imagine personally trying to like walk around in or do any work in. So just like total atmospheric soup, and the heat indices as a result rose up toward 120 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a real number. You can see that green color here matches up with 120 degrees on our color bar here. So that is about as hot and humid as it gets in the United States. So folks in the Arkansas Delta, pushing over to the Mississippi Delta, dealing with some of the most humid, gross air of the year. And up here in like nice chilly 99 degree Fahrenheit air up in central Illinois is what we were dealing with. So feel for the folks down there. We saw widespread heat pushing all the way up into eastern Nebraska yesterday before that storm system came through. And that's been ushering in cooler air. So we'll look at that here in just a few slides. Look at the all hazards map as of this morning here. There's a color on here we don't see very often, and that's this like brownish orange one here. Those are those tsunami advisories up the coast of California all the way up towards Seattle. Those continue here this morning. I do see tsunami warning listed, but I believe all of those have been allowed to expire at this point. Over in the eastern U.S., we have air quality alerts up in Wisconsin, Minnesota. We've seen with this high pressure system pushing, air is going to flow around that counterclockwise, and we have all these Canadian wildfires up here. So that's pushing smoke into the northern part of the country. To the south of that, those flood watches associated with that storm system making its way into Illinois here this morning. Some lingering severe thunderstorm watches in this kind of pink color here. Those will be allowed to expire soon. And again, south of that today, additional heat all the way up through Boston, New York, Philadelphia, through the Washington, D.C. area. In white are those extreme heat warnings. Unfortunately, another day of those like terribly soupy air here in the Mississippi River Valley. And those heat advisories continue down through the peninsula of Florida as well. Now, these have been truncated, right? As this front and these storms are sagging south, you can kind of see this front making its way just in the heat advisories here issued this morning. I do want to jump over and look at that near surface smoke. So I just reset this here, but you can see this high pressure system pushing in. This is the forecast from the HRRR today, and so you can see that smoke pushing into Wisconsin and Minnesota as well. So along this high pressure system, this is near surface smoke, the kind you can smell. That's really going to reduce air qualities, prompting those air quality alerts that we saw from the National Weather Service. If we jump over and look at the infrared satellite, we can see, obviously those storms flowing through eastern Iowa into Illinois, but you can kind of see that this upper level ridge has been squashed and stretched out a bit from the west to the east, all the way from Texas over toward the Carolinas. You can just kind of follow the high clouds, and you can see that this ridge starting to weaken a bit. It's not this big expansive ridge like this now. It's starting to get a little bit more stretched out, and that's allowing this cold front to push further to the south here. If I jump over and just show you those upper level winds this morning, you can kind of see that this trough is starting to dominate the weather here in the continental U.S. This ridge is starting to get weaker. It's starting to break up a bit. This piece over here by Texas, another piece here over North Carolina. We're going to be seeing this in the forecast here today. Now, in between, along that jet stream level flow, between that trough and between the ridge here, we're going to see additional storms develop along that line that's heading out of Iowa into Illinois. So I'm going to make this, let's reset it here. I think we'll still be at the 6C, yeah. So I'm going to make this valid about 7 a.m. These storms are likely going to be a little bit further east than maybe the HRRR is resolving by 7 a.m., but nonetheless not a terrible forecast thus far. You can see by 3 or 4 p.m. expecting additional thunderstorm development somewhere here in eastern Missouri, the northeast part of the state, eastern Iowa, and north central Illinois. Those push through the state this evening, 6 to 7 p.m. And then getting up here, kind of spinning up this kind of stratiform precipitation. If this exact forecast holds true, this would be some decent rain for northeast Illinois, Chicago, northwest Indiana, southwest Michigan, an area that has lacked rainfall this year. They haven't gone a wide stretch without it. In fact, if we just jump over and look at Michigan City, Indiana, this is kind of right on the border between Michigan, named correctly, or maybe incorrectly, it should be called Indiana City if it's still in Indiana. But we've seen these stair steps, so there's been rain events this year, even timely ones kind of during pollination, but these have not been, you're talking 0.5, 0.6 a week apart, and that's just enough that even here, by the end of July, almost 6 to 7 inches below where they would typically be. So hoping to get maybe a 0.5 or a 1 inch rainfall out of this to get them a little bit closer to average, and appears to be trending that way right now with these storm systems coming through. Those will push further to the east overnight as this front continues to sag south, bringing a relief from those terribly soupy temperatures and humidity that we've seen in that area. If we just jump over and look at those, this is the NDFD high forecast from the National Weather Service. You can kind of see that front where it's expected today, somewhere through central Illinois. It's not a coincidence that those storms that we talked about are following right along that. It's not a coincidence that that jet stream level flow between the trough and between that ridge above it is flowing right between that on the thermal gradient. We call that the kind of thermal wind balance of the atmosphere. These things are all connected together. Tomorrow, that sags even further to the south, so through the Texas Panhandle all the way up into Pennsylvania. Look at the high temperatures on the cold side of this front here. 70s across Illinois, northern Missouri, Iowa, and this is just going to feel fantastic on Thursday. Still seeing some of that heat lingering, but again, with that ridge starting to be stretched out, it's not as oppressive as it was earlier this week. We continue to see that pushing south on Friday, and then ultimately Saturday bringing widespread relief to the area, even the temperatures coming down south of the front and Florida here. So 70s or low 80s, maybe mid 80s here in the mid-south as we go through Saturday and Sunday. And then with this high pressure system starting to dominate over the weekend, probably looking at clear to sunny, partly cloudy skies over a wide area of the country. You can even see the west cooler at this point as well. So a very beautiful weekend on tap for some folks who've been suffering under some intense temperatures. We jump over and look at the 3-kilometer NAM. I'm just going to get it's kind of a different opinion here. So let's take this through this morning. You can see that storm system pushing through northern Missouri, western Illinois. It kind of keeps that going a little bit longer here. Now 3 p.m., that system's still in some fashion here through central Illinois, eastern Missouri towards St. Louis. Develops through the central part of the state and then pushing into Indiana. We're still seeing some nice rainfall move into that corridor that we talked about. Some storms sagging all the way along this front back toward the Panhandle area of Oklahoma and Texas. And then as we go into Thursday, this pushes off toward the east. Some more thunderstorms here, Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio, over toward West Virginia, some lingering showers and storms back toward Arkansas. And then maybe by Thursday evening, seeing just some development here of convection over by the Panhandle and then Colorado. So go through Thursday evening, but largely on the back side of this, behind that front, looking at clear conditions and cooler temperatures. You can see this kind of same story unfold in the 500 millibar heights. So this is the forecast from the ACMWF. That ridge, you can almost see just here this morning. I'll make it valid about 7 a.m. You're almost kind of like losing that ridge look to it. We see the contour color here is a little bit warmer on the color bar, but we're losing kind of an obvious ridge here as it gets stretched out toward Texas. This trough starting to dominate. That continues through the forecast period. Take this into Thursday, now Friday. See this ridge, it's been translated up over Canada, bringing heat here. There's also this upper level low spinning over California that's going to be pushing moisture into this area critically, even all the way up into Alberta. So we're going to have to watch that as these temperatures increase here, as that is a risk of this area going over drier, just given the temperatures that are going to increase across the Northwest and the Canadian Prairie here with this upper level trough bringing some timely precipitation in. So take this forecast further into Sunday and Monday. Still seeing this ridge is kind of parked up here, northeast Saskatchewan, northwest Manitoba, allowing some troughing to develop underneath it on Monday. See another one of these here over California and Oregon. We talked yesterday about some of this tropical development, pulling some of the subtropical ridging out of the central United States. By Wednesday, starting to see some of that redevelop here over New Mexico and Texas, but still seeing generally troughing here over the central and eastern U.S., some troughing over Montana, and then ridging. That ridge has just slowly been translating toward the east through next week, before we might see this ridge redevelop here over the southwest or Texas, and starting to see what we talked about yesterday with this kind of ridge over the Canadian Maritimes and ridge over pushing into the Northeast Pacific, leaving this area a little bit open and exposed to cooler temperatures, relative to these other two areas that we just talked about. Now, if we look at this in terms of a precipitation conversation, it's been changing a little bit. So a little bit of the model data has shifted drier over the last, kind of what I'll call the last 24 hours here. So I'm going to play this quickly through the next few days. We kind of talked about the precipitation story. Just getting this into Friday evening, now 7 p.m., quite a bit of precipitation occurring across the southeast. You can see just off the front range in the high plains here. Additional showers and thunderstorms are possible. Now, if I take this back just a second here, this is tomorrow afternoon. You can see central Oregon, northeast California, western Montana, Salmon River Mountains here in Idaho, seeing some precipitation, but the upper level low, as it gets over the northern Rockies here, see precipitation unfold over a wider area Friday afternoon. And then by Saturday afternoon, at 7 p.m., you can see it pushing all the way up into British Columbia and then Alberta, through the Golden Triangle of Montana, and then into the southern Canadian Prairie here, even southwest Saskatchewan. Continuing to see precipitation in the southeast. Maybe seeing some storm systems here over in the Central Plains on Sunday. And then an additional day of rainfall here, again, the southern Canadian Prairie. So even despite the heat, trying to build into the north here, northern Alberta, northern Saskatchewan, still seeing rainfall come in underneath that ridge in a pretty timely fashion here. Take this into Monday and Tuesday. What we have seen is this high pressure system has been a little bit more dominant on the models here as this ridge pushes toward the east, and it's pushed some of the rainfall out of this area toward the southeast or toward the front range. You can kind of see that here, even Tuesday and Wednesday, not a lot of rainfall in this quarter here. There are some storm systems expected to come off the Rockies and out into the northern plains. These are kind of amalgamating and pushing toward the southeast as we go through the middle of next week. These will probably kind of have a life of their own in between the high pressure systems here, and just kind of, you can see them almost just like bubbling around here Wednesday into Thursday before trying to push east across Iowa, Illinois. Earlier in the week, we're over in Nebraska and the Dakotas. Maybe by Friday, pushing more so into the central Corn Belt. Additional rain late next week for the Canadian Prairie, but all the while, this quarter here been shifting drier in the forecast period. So if I jump over and show you just the 7-day precipitation anomalies, this quarter looks wet here, but a lot of this is expected here today in this quarter. So if I jump over and show you the 4 to 10 day precipitation anomalies, look at that difference. Wet in British Columbia, southern Alberta, southern Saskatchewan, really kind of the southern half of the area. A lot of this area is the growing region of the prairie versus the north. Wet in the southeast, Georgia, South Carolina. Might have to keep an eye on some flooding in the Atlanta metro area. But this area here, outside of that, hard to predict system coming out of the northern plains, kind of pushing south to the southeast, maybe toward Illinois. And that might be our best precipitation chance next week. Otherwise, looking on the drier side for a very wide area of the country. Now, fortunately, not seeing widespread heat in this area like we saw this week. So it's kind of well timed in the sense that while we are seeing this kind of break in precipitation, not getting those high heat index values and evapotranspirative rates. Jump over and look at the GFS. This is the 4 to 10 day anomaly. It looks very similar with this kind of splotchy thunderstorm development expected next week. So some counties in here, looking at appreciable rainfall, it's just not clear which. And outside of that, you could draw a pretty wide area of dry conditions, even at least from the GFS, from Manitoba to Saskatchewan here into Ontario, and then the southeast staying wet here from the GFS. And the AFS, which always looks a little bit drier on these forecasts, you have to read it a little bit differently given the change in resolution. Again, southeast wet, Canadian prairie wet, drier here maybe into the eastern prairie, and then a wide area here across the middle part of the country. I mentioned those temperatures. We'll look at the temperature swatches here, almost like you're trying to pick a paint color. On the far left, these are the next 5 days of temperatures. So there's that cold front coming through, that Chamber of Commerce weekend that's on tap for much of the middle part of the country. The heat increasing. In northwest Canada, that's British Columbia, Alberta there. Northwest part still kind of on the cooler side in the southern portion of the prairie with that rainfall expected. Look at the 5 to 10 day anomaly. This is getting into the early next work week and staying cooler in a wide area here across the eastern continental U.S. Maybe a slow warm up next week as that ridge redevelops here over New Mexico and Texas. See some of that here. And then this on the far right side is our 10 to 15 day temperature anomaly. And you're starting to see here that ridge pushing in over New England, bringing those temperatures up, and that ridge rebuilding over the Northeast Pacific, bringing the western coast of the U.S. and Canada, those temperatures are up. And then also watching here, remember Texas and New Mexico saw that ridge trying to redevelop in some of those long-range models. Seeing some of that linger as well. But in between the plains, the central U.S. over toward the central Corn Belt, and my face is down here, so I'm going to scroll down. There's the AFS. Still seeing cooler temperatures in this part of the country. So despite the dry air, looking at cooler temperatures over kind of a long 10 to 15 day stretch here in the middle part of the country. Look at the precipitation in the longer range, again, with kind of the ridging pushing into each side here, would expect some precipitation chances through the middle part of the country. You can see that from the ECMWF ensemble, where you can see an area here all the way from the prairie down through the central Corn Belt, Indiana, Ohio, with increased precipitation, where we're seeing a lack of it. Maybe somewhere here over the Canadian Maritimes, pushing it over toward New England, with that ridge starting to redevelop here over New Mexico and Texas, down here. And then some question as to whether we keep this precipitation going up into British Columbia, if this will get all the way down here into the northwest. Rooting for some of this here, given some of the wildfire activity we've seen this year. The fact that we are seeing a bit of a warm up in temperatures here, my concern for an increase or an uptick in that activity will increase. So hoping for some rain to get in here in that long range forecast. That's just the ECMWF ensemble. But if I jump over and show you the 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, this takes us all the way from the 6th to the 12th next month. They do have some higher contours here for Washington and Oregon. You can see that kind of same corridor here through the middle part of the country into the eastern Corn Belt and New England, whereas that area in the southwest with that ridge redeveloping here, seeing the drier issues magnified in that corridor. In the long range, the conversation that Eric and I have been talking about is certainly the MJO as it's gone from the eastern Pacific, and the expectation, that's where it is now, helping to produce that tropical development we talked about south of Hawaii, pushing toward sometime in early August, crossing the Atlantic, potentially seeing an uptick in activity there. There might be a 5 to 10 day lag on some of that, prompting a storm maybe in the middle part of August, and then coming all the way around by the middle part of the month, either to phase 2 or 3. And we've been talking quite a bit how when we see that transition, we often see, at least in the historical analogs, like a phase, let's do phase 2 in the middle of August here. I'll zoom in on North America. We often see some sort of Midwest ridge, so we've been waiting for that in the models. And obviously over the next 10 to 15 days, right, we looked at those temperatures, not seeing that here. If it is going to come, it might come from the northeast and start to push east to west. We see that sometimes, but not quite seeing it in the long range yet. If I take the ECMWF ensemble forecast out to late next week, this is Friday, August 8th. If anything, this ridge is down here over the southwest or the Four Corners. There's that kind of New England or Canadian Maritime ridge. There's that one trying to push in from northwest Canada, but not seeing any obvious, central U.S. or Midwest ridge right now outside of the Four Corners. If I take the AFS out even further, this is like the 8th. You can see early next week trying to keep it here in the mid-south over toward Texas on Friday. There's the Maritime ridge. There's that northwest continental U.S. one. bringing those temperatures up for Washington and Oregon. But even if I take this forecast out to the 12th, middle part of August, if anything, it's trying to re-strengthen this Four Corners ridge into a whole western U.S. Ridge. Now, this forecast from the AFS, I took it way out. We're talking like 15 days at this point, so I wouldn't put too much weight into this, but just looking for any signal here in the long range that we're going to see maybe a Midwest or Plains ridge develop, and I'm not quite seeing it yet. So we'll continue to watch that. The ECMWF extended, which we show occasionally, has just been glued to this like drier pattern across the middle part of the country, but not necessarily the heat. And so if I take this out through September 1st, see some of this dryness here through a wide area, perhaps picking up on that kind of 4 to 10 day precipitation anomaly in the near term. But again, don't see it trying to establish major ridging here. So what I'm guessing is what we'll see is after this cool down, we're going to see this attempt probably sometime in mid to late August where the heat will return. But a lot of the phases kind of outside of phase 2, if some of these forecasts here, I'll see if I can pull that up again, have us not getting to phase 3. It was sinking back into null space, which would add some uncertainty in the forecast and perhaps a lack of staying power to that ridge anyway. But if we transition into phase 3, we see that ridge start to elongate a bit. We even get some flow back into the eastern Corn Belt, perhaps bring some precipitation there. If I bring this into like phase 4 in like middle to late part of August, the northwest flow starts coming back into maybe Iowa or Illinois. So this would, if it lingers, increase some drought and I should say some heat risk maybe toward the end of August in this area here. But it really feels like more of the same what we've seen in July with this kind of rinse and repeat. So cool weather for the next kind of 10 days in the middle part of the country and then flipping that over to warm some point in late August. But to say it's going to be this kind of extended August, heat and drought risk that's going to impact, those NDVI values or year-end numbers, just not seeing it right now, especially given all the rainfall we've seen in the middle part of the country and what the Midwest is going to see over the next kind of 24 to 48 hours. Speaking of that, the SPC, I did not show their forecast for the next 3 days because frankly it's just not terribly concerning or notable at this point. I'll show it very quickly here. So you see the marginal risk here over the central Corn Belt today with those storms that I talked about. Very small areas of marginal risk tomorrow and then none on the third day. So that severe risk, fortunately, shrinking through the week after seeing that derecho, or maybe that kind of dual derecho on Monday evening. I'll leave it there today. I'll talk with you all tomorrow on Thursday. Thanks for watching.